Welcome everybody. Today we have a very special guest. We are not going to fly to Australia, although he's from Perth, West Australia, but we are going to fly from Europe, from Austria to the other direction, that is New York, to Brooklyn in particular. And we are going to meet with this special guest. His name is Michael Sheldrick. And Michael Sheldrick is one of the co-founders of Global Citizen. It's a very international, famous NGO. And just to start with, before we go into all the topic of Global Citizen, that I consider myself a global citizen, a citoyen du monde, a world citizen. I would like to ask you, Michael, maybe first a little bit about your personal story, because I saw it on different media, on different magazines where you have contributed and written articles, but also on your LinkedIn profile, that you have traveled quite a lot. No, you worked a bit for the Oak Tree Foundation. You were youth delegate for in different occasions. You studied at the University of Western Australia, and now you're in New York. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, look, it's funny. One of the great pleasures of my job is I get to travel around. Obviously not during COVID, pre-pandemic, but I get to meet some amazing, some of the most heroic, courageous, brave people on the front lines in different countries around the world, whether that's Rotarians raising funds for polio eradication, whether it's health workers working in maternal health clinics, or those delivering life-saving vaccines. Yeah, or those speaking to young girls, like, you know, in schools, in townships just outside of Johannesburg, about, you know, menstrual hygiene, sanitary pads and napkins. You know, it's been extraordinary to meet many of these people, and then I get to tell their story to policymakers and others in a bid to get them to stand in solidarity. But really, in terms of my story, what's quite unusual is growing up in Perth, which is the most isolated city in the world. My physical world, if you like, where I traveled from, was very small proximity. You know, I didn't, during my whole time in high school, I never went overseas, never went on a plane. And really, where my awareness around these global issues came from, and my desire to contribute in terms of addressing many of these global inequities we see in the world, really came in my first year of high school. Yeah, when I started, I was bottom of the class, you know, struggling, probably wasn't on track to finish high school, let alone get into university. And, you know, I had this great teacher who one day, you know, I did this in-class assignment, got home from school, didn't think anything of it. And there was a message on the voicemail from this teacher, Mr. Byrne, and he was asking my mum for a call. And I thought, oh, that's a kind of strange, creepy message. What have I done wrong? And it turns out he said, you know, I had topped the class in that one assignment. I think there's more to you than meets the eye. And then sure enough, you know, he said to work with me, he challenged me. And by the end of that year, you know, the day before the last day of school, he came around with this certificate saying I was #1 in the class. And the reason why I share that story is, you know, I never felt the smartest kid in the class. Indeed, I always felt, remembered what it felt like to be called the loser, you know, the bottom kid in class. And I always felt that, you know, it was really that teacher who, you know, saw something in me that gave me an opportunity. And I just thought, you know, there must be millions of people around the world, you know, young people who, you know, because they don't have great quality teachers, or maybe it's because they die from lack of access to a 13-cent vaccine before the age of 5, so don't even make it to school in the first place, but they don't have that same opportunity that I did. And that's really where that inequity really came from. And it was, I guess, a sense of gratitude out of the opportunities I had growing up in Perth that really fueled that. And so years later, when I finished high school, yeah, I met the other founders of Global Citizen, Hugh Way and Simon, and really we built this organization out of a desire to challenge the systems that prevent people from lifting themselves out of poverty. And that's really how I got involved.
Wow.
and my story. And so, you know, came from, you know, very, if you like, you know, a local story, if you like. And I often say to people, you don't need to go and volunteer in developing countries to have an epiphany or to, you know, come to the realization that you can contribute to addressing these global inequities. You know, we see it every day around us as a constant reminder. Yeah.
Wow, quite an interesting, inspiring story. And what was it the decision then to study law? Because I saw you studied law after high school, because you thought with law, with these instruments, you could contribute in Australia, and then it opened up the world for you, that you wanted to travel and found Global Citizen.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how I came to study law, because when I was at law school, you know, I was one of the few kids at the University of Western Australia that came from you know, in Australia, public schools, government school versus private school. And I was probably one of the few kids in my cohort that was from a government school. And I often had this sense of not belonging there. Everyone else, you know, they had uncles, fathers, you know, mothers who were in the law profession, were partners, were professors, were justices. And I always had the sense, what am I doing here? How I actually ended up there was you know, it was another teacher my last year of school. As I was getting my grades in and I ended up in the top 1% of the state, you know, a lot of people were telling me to do this, that, or the other. I really didn't know. And it was my English literature teacher, Mr. Kemp, who said, you know, do law, Michael, because, you know, firstly, resist the urge just to go out and earn a lot of money. Do what you think you'll find, you know, challenging, intellectually stimulating, and who knows, you might make a difference along the way. So that's actually how I ended up doing law. I don't think I ever really had any intent of being a lawyer, and certainly when I was clerk in corporate law firms, that reinforced that. And it was during that process, you know, one of the founders, Way, I think it was in one of my final years when I was clerking at this law firm, asked me, what comes next when you graduate? What are you going to do? And I thought, well, I mean, I guess I'm going to become a lawyer and maybe do some good on the side pro bono. And he said, you know, you can do that, or I've got a better idea on how you can put your skills to use. And that's where they asked me to run a campaign they were running on polio eradication, to put polio on the agenda in Perth. And, you know, what I would say is, you know, those skills came in handy. I'm definitely glad that I studied law. Like, I think the forensic precision it gives you, the analytical skills, they're really, you know, they're key skills that make you an effective advocate, and which I use every day. It's just a different form of advocacy. I'm not advocating on behalf of the client in a legal sense, but more advocating to policymakers, leaders of businesses, you know, on behalf of others, you know, to get them to make changes that's going to benefit people around the world.
When you talk about advocating, maybe you could, from your international experience, maybe you could give us some insights of what is important when advocating. And isn't it very similar to sales, because you also have to sell to different public key players, from NGOs, from states, from universities, from activists, etc. You have to sell the idea. No, we have to do something about the eradication. Or how do you see this? And another question would be, when you were introducing yourself, you were mentioning you travel quite a lot to the townships of South Africa, to other places around the world. What would be like maybe the most inspiring stories? I guess you have many very nice encounters with other people, with the challenges. What would you like to share with us?
Yeah, I think firstly, what I would just say on being an effective advocate and the correlation with being a good salesperson. Look, I would say at its heart, being an effective advocate is all about being a great storyteller, being able to share stories in a way that's going to inspire others. I was once told, actually by Way, the gentleman I was referring to earlier, that it's not facts that move people, it's not concerts that move people, it's not celebrities, but it's stories that move people. And I think often when we're trying to advocate on these issues, we're always trying to find what is that great narrative, what is that great story that's going to inspire people to action. And so that's really at its core of being an effective advocate. And I've seen that in policymakers. You know, when you are speaking to them, you can hurl all the statistics, and then when you change tact and make it about a story that they can relate to, suddenly they peak up. And I think that is generally what moves people. It's that deep innate human connection that moves us to action. But in terms of, you know, one of the most inspiring stories, look, there's many. I think back to, you know, this going back a few years ago now, when I went to Pakistan. You know, Pakistan is now one of the few remaining countries that still has polio, and they've had various issues why in Pakistan polio remains an issue. But unfortunately, around the time I visited, health workers had come under attack by the Pakistani Taliban in the Northwest frontier and had been killed. And I was invited to speak at this university to a group of health medical students who were looking to raise awareness about polio vaccination, why it was important. And, it was interesting. When before I spoke, some of the students said, some of the professors are nervous about us doing this, about us activating in this way, because they don't want us, and therefore the university, to become targets for our health activism. And I remember got up and I simply said, we're inspired by the fact that they're doing that. We stand in solidarity. And it was amazing seeing these students who were in their early 20s. Most of them were female, who were so passionate and so clear on what their country could be, and also this sense of pride that they wanted to feel by eradicating polio in their country. And I remember hearing them speak, and at the end of that, the professor was also moved. And I remember he got up and he said, look, I was initially nervous because I didn't want the students to put themselves at risk, but now I see this passion, and it's actually inspired me and made me think, how can we not do this? And so any support that's needed, will be forthcoming from the university. But I always think back to that, and I remain in touch with one of those students, and she's since gone on to become an incredible. She's come to Columbia. She studied health. She's done amazing things globally in public health, and all of those young people who have the potential to be the leaders of their country and to make the policies that need to be. But yeah, that's one story that comes to mind. But really, there's no shortage that I could talk about.
So interesting would be when the book is coming out of your many stories, because I guess you have so many countries. I don't know how many countries have you traveled? Because you mentioned Colombia, Pakistan, etc. No, have you counted?
The last time I counted was a few years ago. I think it was over 70. I would need to count again. My sister's probably gone to more. She's a serial marathon runner and bicycle rider, and actually, believe it or not, 6 years ago she rode from France to China as a fundraiser to raise funds for WaterAid's work on helping girls have access to sanitary pads and napkins. So she's even more of a
I think we have to have her on the show also. We have to interview her.
She would love that. I mean, it was extraordinary. She everything from strapping watermelons down on a bike in Iran to going through all the stands, to making it through Western China, teaching people English, and ultimately at the end making it to the Great Wall of China. But yeah.
Wow. Inspiring family.
Running our family. Yeah.
Yeah. Not only the family, but I think you have also great teachers, huh? From what you.
Yeah. I was very, very fortunate. Have great teachers. And it was funny. One of them, the one I mentioned, Mr. Byrne, I hadn't seen in many years. And just before I moved from Perth, I gave a radio interview in which first time I'd ever shared that story. and was able to connect with him before I moved to America and just thank him, because sometimes teachers must not realize the impact they have. And I'm sure for him, he was just doing the right thing by challenging me. But, I really did see that moment as a fork in the road.
Great community. We sent him best regards to Mr. Byrne.
Yeah.
How old are
sure.
you actually, Michael?
I'm 32 now. I turned 33 in June, so 2 months away.
You're so young and you look even young.
Thank you.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit more for the audience that doesn't know Global Citizen. What is Global Citizen about? Why do they do what they do? What do they do actually? And who are doing the work, let's say, no? Maybe you can give us a little bit like a brief summary of what is Global Citizen, what is it standing for, and maybe also what is the position currently now with the pandemic?
Yeah. So Global Citizen, really at our core, we're a movement established to support the end of extreme poverty by 2030. And so, we really see ourselves as drivers of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which all countries agreed to in 2015, which really map out the way to which we can end extreme poverty, reduce the spread of inequality and mitigate climate change by 2030. And really at our core, we see the citizen as the primary agent of change. And through our approach, which we call POP meets policy, we aim to incentivize and drive citizens to take action, whether that be emailing your local politician, volunteering your time, signing a petition to world leaders, to send world leaders and business leaders a message to make the policies needed to end extreme poverty. And we then hold those leaders accountable. And so, at the moment, you mentioned how our work has evolved with the pandemic. Well, really, the pandemic is a huge existential crisis to our mission, because prior to the pandemic, we had been seeing poverty levels reduce. Admittedly, they had started to stagnate, and we already had our work cut out to end extreme poverty by 2030. But with the pandemic, we're now looking at potentially as many as 160 million more people being pushed into extreme poverty by the end of this year. And so our message is, we can't go back to ending extreme poverty unless we first end the pandemic. And the only way we can end the pandemic is by making sure a vaccine is available to everyone everywhere. And so right now, we've just launched this campaign. We launched it on Tuesday. It's called Vax Live, the concert to reunite the world. It's going to be taking place on May 8th. It's going to be available globally on YouTube. It's going to be their YouTube original, so anyone can watch us anywhere in the world. So everyone should really get behind it. But the message isn't just to support getting a vaccine, but it really is this idea that everyone everywhere has the right to this vaccine. And unless everyone is protected, we're not getting back to normal. No one is safe until everyone is safe. And so we're calling on the wealthiest countries who have purchased all the vaccines, to donate their vaccines, not later, but beginning now, especially, across all of the poorest countries in the world. There's 27 million heroic health workers on the front lines that many of whom still haven't yet received the vaccine. And so that's really our push right now, is this idea addressing vaccine nationalism and ensuring everyone has access, because as soon as we end the pandemic, we can then get back to recovering better together and back to our mission of ending extreme poverty. Yeah. And
what do you think about the biggest challenges after the pandemic? Of course, the pandemic, COVID now is the issue, but after the pandemic, which challenges are we facing? What could be our priority, also as a normal citizen?
Yeah, so we released back in February, we published this, we called it our recovery plan for the world. And it outlines 5 key points that we believe the world needs to focus on right now over the coming 12 months. The first is, I've already mentioned it, ending the pandemic. The second one is just avoiding a doubling of the number of people going hungry. Because of the pandemic, we're marching towards a doubling of those facing starvation. And to me, this is the most crude form of poverty, because you're talking about people that can't even put food on their table, that have to make trade-offs. And so we really need to address that. Thirdly, there were 1.5 billion kids around the world who had their education disrupted by the pandemic. So many kids in developing countries who can't access, internet, that can't learn remotely, they were already behind, and now they've been pushed further behind. So we really need to get education back on track. Fourthly, we need to reboot climate change, because as we saw last year, although there was a drop in emissions for the first time in years, in some ways, that drop in emissions for our behavior was still quite small, despite all of the collapse in activity. And it revealed just how hard the challenge of decarbonizing our economy is. And so one of the biggest challenges we need to start working on is climate change. And finally, and this cuts across all the issues, is advancing equity for all, making sure, whether you're a person of color, whether you're a woman, making sure you're not disproportionately impacted, which we've seen through this pandemic. So these are the issues that we're focused on. Of course, later this year, we've got the Glasgow COP with world leaders looking to set new ambitious targets. With the US change in administration, we've seen, an opportunity open. But as John Kerry, he said this at the launch of our recovery plan, this is President Biden's envoy on climate change. This decade will be the decade when it is determined whether or not we will avoid a greater than 1.5 degrees temperature rise. And that's important, because if we don't avoid that, it will be the world's poor who will be hit the most and will suffer the most. Yeah.
Incredible. You mentioned it before that you were also working in a law firm. I saw also that you were working for the Ban Ki-moon. So you have also with Global Citizen different experiences with multiple key players. What would you say are the challenges, also as a co-founder of Global Citizen, when establishing such an organization, such a NGO foundation, concerning with fundraising, concerning with getting to a lot of people, concerning with politics and all the other players?
Yeah, look, I would say, earlier on, our challenge, like many advocates, was very much one of accessing, getting in the room with the decision makers, because, unless you're a fellow prime minister or president or CEO, sometimes it's hard to get their attention. And so in our early years, we would be fighting just to get leaders to pay attention to us, so that we could tell them, this is what we need you to do. And so a lot of our time was, asking our global citizens to message, email world leaders to get them to pay attention to us, so we could have that dialogue. Now, it's the challenge is there's so much noise out there, so much, so many things that need attention. It's really one of priority. How do we, focus, avoid all the clutter, or cut through the clutter, and focus on the issues that can really have the biggest impact, save the most lives? And how can we make sure that we are enacting those policies right now? Like that is the biggest challenge right now. And so often it does mean, as you've grown, we now have people coming to us presenting ideas and partnering. And so we've had to learn the ability to say no and remain focused. I think so we've gone from, trying to get in the doors of the most powerful, to people now wanting to approach us and partner, and making sure that we partner in a way that enhances our mission, and that we don't lose focus, because I think that focus is what's going to be needed if we're going to end extreme poverty. Yeah.
Wow, very interesting. Michael, what would you say personally, as well as global citizen? Where do you see yourself as well as global citizen in 5 years or in 10 years from now on? Of course, it's difficult because of COVID, etc. It seems that we don't know anything. Everything takes so long, etc. No, so unpredictable.
Yeah, look, I would say for global citizen, you know, I would like to see us make even more strides towards our mission. So in 5 years' time, that will be 4 years off the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're almost halfway now, getting to the halfway point. And I would like to see us in 5 years with a serious shot at being able to end extreme poverty by 2030. And that's going to be one heck of a task and going to require a lot of work from leaders, businesses, philanthropists, and citizens between now and then. But that's where I'd like us to be. You know, for me personally, you know, I think, you know, you can never know enough, and life is a journey, and I have so much more to learn. You know, we've seen, you know, in the last year, you know, the private sector step up its efforts more on the pandemic. You know, I would like to learn a lot more about, you know, the systems of finance, the systems of corporate power, so I can better understand how we can bend that towards supporting our mission. Because I think, you know, we've seen over the last year how we can't put all of our eggs into one basket. Government is always going to have a critical role to play, but it can't be the only major player. And if they're not leading, others need to lead. And so for me, I want to learn better understand that in terms of other stakeholders and the role that they can play, whether that's learning formally, informally. You know, I'm doing this short course right now online that Berkeley Law School's got on the role of corporate power. Like that's really what I'd like to do, and then apply those learnings to, you know, our advocacy work in the hope of being able to, whether it's unlocking more funding, having greater impact, or helping to contribute towards the reduction in emissions that's much needed. Yeah.
Okay. I've seen also on your profile that you are quite a curious, creative, very energetic person. You write, you speak, you do different things, also for magazines. Where do you take your energy from, and maybe how do you work personally? Know about your habits, or maybe you can tell us a little bit more, not only from the professional perspective, but also from yourself. No, because you mentioned it, you were like the loser. You didn't feel good in school, and suddenly comes the rock star, and you rock the school, etc. No, so transformation process.
Oh, that's very, very kind. I'm not sure most people would describe me still as a rock star, even if we've managed to get some of their support. I mean, I still think the real rock stars are those health workers I mentioned, and those on the front lines. But look, you know, I mean, I think where I get my energy from, you know, I think it's when people say something can't be done. And sometimes people, I mean, it's fine to be skeptical, but sometimes that can be unhealthy in the sense that it talks people out of even trying, right? Even whether it's making an ask because you don't think it's going to be credible, or whether it's pushing something through because people don't think it can be done. And I think when we do that, and you see success come from that, and you see progress from that, it may not be what you intended, but I think that momentum gives you energy to keep going, and to keep being bold. And yeah, I would just say, you know, don't let yourself be talked out of even asking. Sometimes even asking for something, if people don't think you have a positive response, because you'll be surprised. And I think it's that keeps me going, because it actually reminds you that actually there is a lot of support out there for our mission. Sometimes people just have to be asked. In terms of personal habits, I mean, the last year has been very different. Usually I would spend a lot of time traveling around, and it can be hard to, you know, have any kind of routine. I'm fortunate that we've got a great team based in different parts of the world. Usually I will wake up with WhatsApp messages from our team in Europe and Africa. So usually the first couple of hours is spent speaking to our African, our European team, responding to WhatsApps, messaging, getting emails, you know, getting that all out the way. Then, you know, the morning tends to be taken up with a lot of team meetings. We tend to do that in the morning because it's where, you know, with the Eastern time zone of the States, Europe and America. So we'll have a lot of team meetings. And then in the afternoons, that's where, you know, I tend to do a lot of the actual work, whether that's writing, whether that's trying to get people on the phone and to harangue into doing something. Yeah, and then in the evenings, try and keep that for reflection, you know, whether that's reading, listening to podcasts, you know, or writing something, you know, without any distractions. And then usually most nights I will usually lay in bed listening to a podcast or audiobook before I fall asleep. But I've really I've very much got into Audible over the last year, actually, and so I've listened to a lot of audiobooks, mostly in the evenings. Yeah.
Well, perfect. That's a nice switch to the last part of this dialogue, where I would like to ask you, like, or give you like short, brief words, and you have to spontaneously, in a fast way, without thinking too much, just respond what comes into mind. No, and you mentioned it, the books. So, audible books. Which ones are you reading at the moment, or listening?
So,
sorry.
Yeah, so I just finished Bill Gates' book on climate change, which I very much recommend. It's a great refresher for those that do know a lot, and it's a great introduction for those that don't. And I'm currently listening to a book called The Catalpa Rescue, which is actually nothing related at all to my work. It's actually about in the mid-19th century, a group of Irish people being sent to Perth, being put in jail, and then managing to escape from the most isolated city. And it's written really, really well. And it's more a way to escape and just focus on something a little bit different. But yeah, that's what I'm listening to now.
Habits, your habits?
Oh, habits.
What comes into mind? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying in my spare time to write a podcast actually on my family history. One of the things I learned 18 months ago was one of my granduncles actually died in the Second World War, and no one really knew how he died. And I kind of uncovered that. It's kind of been a little personal mission to uncover what happened. And so that's what I'm doing in my spare time.
Okay. Anxiety.
Anxiety. I would say you know, when I have unanswered emails, you know, I have to go through at the end of each day. Otherwise, I find it hard to sleep. Yeah.
Procrastination.
Ooh.
Or not?
Sorry?
Does it exist in your world or not?
I would say I'm a big news junkie. So procrastination would be reading a lot of news articles, especially anything to do with the pandemic, to do with vaccines. You know, I will read a lot of that, but often, you know, you have to stop yourself because you have to be like, okay, a lot of these news articles are just saying the same thing now. There's nothing more new to be said. But yeah, that's probably my my biggest vice.
Personal organization.
I'm a big fan of the Apple Calendar. I put everything in there, including personal. commitment. So yeah, try and calendarize everything, including whether it's coordinating out time to write or space to do something, which is just for me to make sure I actually do it and hold myself accountable.
Any app or hacks that you want to recommend?
I not to be honest, I used Splitwise early on for email organization, which is great because it will put the priority ones, but then I found out I was missing a lot of emails, so I stopped using it. I went back to the normal mail app, but I did find Splitwise useful for a while. I mean, to be honest, I would say most of my screen time is probably used between my mail, social media, and WhatsApp. I spend a lot of time speaking to people around the world on WhatsApp.
Money.
I would say for me, money is the fact that last year billionaires made a record $2 trillion, and the number of billionaires increased a record number. I think we're now at 2,700 billionaires around the planet, and yet philanthropic giving didn't actually increase all that much. And so for me, I think it's remembering that we've got 2,700 billionaires who are worth over $10 trillion, and yet the cost of getting a vaccine to everyone everywhere is 38 billion. So it's less than 1%. That to me is what rings to mind when you say money. And so maybe we could get more support from some of these billionaires, which is part of our Give While You Live campaign.
Personal finances.
I would say, are we doing everything in our own control to make sure that our money is, when it's invested, is having the greatest social impact or impact on the environment it can?
Okay. Happiness.
For me, honestly, when I'm reading a book, when my mind becomes absorbed and I forget about everything else and I'm being challenged on new ideas.
Creativity.
When I'm in the evenings, when I'm writing an article or something, can I just turn my phone off and can just focus? That's when I have the best ideas. I find sometimes when I'm having back-to-back meetings, it can set my energy from being creative.
Continuous education.
Yes, I would actually like to do more. That's one of the biggest things I want to do. This short course I've been doing at Berkeley has whet my appetite. And so I'm trying to figure out, is there a way that I can continue doing what I'm doing at Global Citizen and do something, because I do miss that and would love to be doing something more. Yeah.
Sense of life.
I would say travel, and with my fiance, even though we haven't traveled around around the world this year, we did get the opportunity to travel around the country, and we got engaged in Montana at Glacier National Park in July last year, actually.
Quite a nice place.
Yeah.
Your average day.
I would say mostly on the phone.
WhatsApp.
or WebEx these days.
Okay. Death.
Yeah. Feeling grateful for all the time I've been able to have with all the loved ones, and actually this pandemic has made me even more grateful for that time, and how you can't take that time for granted. And so, looking forward to, once this is over, seeing my parents in Australia, who I haven't seen in more than a year, and also my grandma in the UK. Yeah. Favorite
films or movies you're watching?
Oh, I would say, we recently watched The Alienist, which is a great series set in turn of the century, 19th century New York. It's quite dark, and it's more like a one of those murder mysteries. but it's very well done. Highly recommend. I think it's on HBO.
Nice. And podcast?
Podcast. I am actually listening to this interesting one. It's an Audible podcast called We Need to Talk About the British Empire. And the reason how I came across it is, you know, in the US in last year, in the light of the George Floyd, tragedy, there was huge reflection on the legacy of slavery in America and how, you know, from the Civil War onwards, there's still a lot of history that needs to be unpacked that many people in America aren't aware of. And it made me think, you know, as an Australian growing up in the Commonwealth, you know, I think we don't learn enough about the legacy of the British Empire. I think in the UK, the British Empire is often a source of pride, and actually looking at, well, what was the impact of that, and how does that inform how people live in different parts of the world today? So looking at a critical analysis, but it's actually very interesting and highly recommend it to people.
The last three questions. What would you say to yourself as a child if you could go back and telling yourself which advice, I don't know if advice, or what would you say? Would you say anything or no?
I think I would say, you know, give sport more of a go. I think as I've gotten older, I've actually done a lot more in terms of exercise, you know, getting involved, whether it's, you know, hiking, outdoors activity. I think as a kid, I was more obsessed with the PlayStation and didn't do enough outdoor activity.
That's your sister, no, Dana?
No, unlike my sister, exactly. And
okay.
and I think in some ways, you know, I mean, PlayStation's great, but yeah, my advice would have been to get outdoors more, especially as I do a lot more now.
Discipline.
Discipline, I would say, often be honest with people and give feedback, and it's not easy sometimes to have hard conversations, but what I've found is when you have those hard conversations with honest feedback, people appreciate it more rather than just being told that they've done something wrong.
And the last one, with which historical or actual personal public person would you like to have a dinner or a coffee? It could be, I don't know, somebody that already died, or it could be a politician, it could be a writer, it could be a philosopher, it could be, I don't know. That would like, yeah. Or with nobody.
No, I mean, there's so many that I can think of, you know, and even now it's hard selecting one.
You can tell also some if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably I would probably say John Curtin. He won't mean much to people outside of Australia, but he was the wartime Prime Minister of Australia. He was a Labor leader, the only Prime Minister to actually come from Perth during the Second World War. And you know, he was didn't have formal education, was a trade unionist, actually fascinating guy, but I would like to meet him. And I think, you know, he's almost like the Winston Churchill or Franklin Delano Roosevelt of Australia in terms of the role he played. I think in terms of other people, you know, I would love to go back and also meet Frederick Douglass, who was the 19th century anti-slavery activist in Australia, in America. And I would love to, you know, hear his stories. I mean, he had a fascinating life, and many people don't realize this. He was, I think, the most photographed man of the 19th century. But yeah, would love to meet him.
Well, excellent, very inspiring and informative. Michael, thank you very much. And I hope after this pandemic, we can get back again, or even Maybe we see us in Montenegro, in South Africa, or somewhere. Thank you very much, Michael. It's a pleasure. And if you want to say something else, go ahead. And if not, we say hasta pronto, hasta la vista.
Hasta pronto. Look, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Michael. Bye-bye.
Thank you.